the message in the WeChat group.
What's that saying? It said something on my... Oh, no.
Yeah, so I'm just going to let
Is
Chad
this cushion okay?
What do you mean? Like aesthetically or...
Yeah, aesthetically.
It's fine, yeah, as long as you're comfortable.
Oh, I'm so tired today.
Mate, you need that coffee. You need that Tim Hortons.
You know, I had a curler about 2 hours ago.
I like a cheeky cola. I had a Mackie D's with a Sprite.
Shock.
Right, here's Chad. Hey.
How's it going?
Hi, Chad.
Yeah.
We were just saying it's late here, so we're trying to get caffeine and Coke and stuff in our bodies.
Yeah. What time's it?
Jake? I'm 11. Jake's 10.
10 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a tough day. Jake, he was saying he's pretty tired. Yeah. We'll give it a go. What time is it in UK? It's 3.
3 o'clock.
All right. No, I appreciate you jumping on this pod. I was telling Jake, like, it's kind of weird because we're both from Scotland. We both lived in Aberdeen. I was there 2010 when I left. We talk a long time online, but we never meet in person.
No, it's true. I think it's been about 5 years on and off chats.
Yeah, I know. This is typical Twitter, right? Like, you just talk to people online and you never meet them. Okay. So this is let's do the intro. This is episode 16 of our podcast, HYPEWORKS podcast. So we basically we both worked in corporate in smartphones in China. That's where I met Jake. I met Jake in a company, and then we started our own business, like do marketing for companies. So and the podcast is our way we can chat with people. So yeah, it's good to have you on.
Well, good to be here. More than happy.
So let's dive in. We were talking online for a long time, and I think I started following you because you go through like phases where you just follow tons of people like in your kind of marketing sphere. And I remember like following you back in the day at Revolut, and then we can come to it later. But then my colleague Jane, she joined Revolut from OnePlus, so like that's how we all. But she's not there now. I think she left. Yeah, she told me she left a while ago.
Yeah, she was with us for about maybe just over a year. And then, I think she left probably the best part like 6, 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah, and the other thing that's linking us together is Jake worked in London.
Okay.
So we talked about that in another podcast, and he's got a lot of thoughts about that. So we can get into that later. Yeah. But how did you get down to London, like from Scotland, like back in the day?
I think I flew down actually, but yeah, I think that there was just nothing for me up there. You know, it's like I grew up in Aberdeen, and you'll know yourself, everything unless you're working in oil and gas, there's nothing there for you. And then I'd always had quite a passion to go into the tech scene, and let's be honest, both back then and even now, there's not much of a tech scene in Scotland, right? It's slim pickings. So for me, it was just an obvious move. I was going to sort of climb the greasy pole, start at the bottom, take a risk. And I'd always been a bit of a traveller. Like even I didn't do much travelling as a kid, family-wise or anything. But I remember when I was at uni, I was always travelling around. So there was no fear on my side of like making a big move and heading down. And yeah, sadly, 8 years later, I'm still stuck here. So.
I think it's a northern thing, right? Like we just see the bright lights in London, and then we just go, right? I didn't do it, but
economic thing as well, though.
Yeah. I think for me it was purely economic driven because there's that old saying of like when you're tired of London, you're tired of life. I've never got that, right? Like London is an okay place. I think people over-egg it and overhype it, and I've never felt that affinity of like, I'd never leave this city. I'm a bit settled here now for many reasons, house, family, all the rest of it. But I've still got a very much a love-hate relationship with London. But if you want to stay in Europe and you want to be quite, prominent in tech, it's just the place. It's the sacrifice you've got.
Let's fire Jake up. Come on, Jake, London.
I was about to say, what about Dublin? That was my comeback to that one.
So
European Union.
I'm going to offend every Irish person I think who will listen to this podcast, but I went to Dublin a couple of times and I just found it depressing. I think, I love architecture. I love beautiful, kind of pretty cities. And while it had a kind of a vibe to it, I just found it a bit soulless.
Not into Guinness then?
I don't mind a Guinness. I'll do that. But I can get Guinness in London. So
we salvaged it with the fans, at least. Nice. Alex, what's the next question, mate? My brain is a bit fried today. I have to be honest. I'm a little bit tired. It's been a long weekend.
London, man. Like Jake could talk like for hours about London.
I could talk for hours about London, but I thought the guests here, they've heard me. I've had a chat with Craig about London.
Yeah, we talked about London in a previous podcast. Yeah, it was very entertaining.
A lot of Ed Ray talked about London. Do we want to have a London section with Chad?
No. Let's move on. So Chad, you went to London, and then Revolut, was that your first job there, or was that like second?
No, it was second job. So my first job was at Rocket Internet.
Right.
Yeah. So it set me up quite nicely culturally for Revolut, to be honest. But German company, build and scale lots of startups all over Europe and Asia. So I worked on one of the portfolio companies launching in the UK. So it was very much there to just try and set up the growth department, manage all the comms, go to market, X, Y, and Z. So that was okay. I think it set me up. It wasn't really the tech route I necessarily wanted to go around. I think I had quite a passion for fintech at that point because, TransferWise were, making some really good grounds. Monzo were making some really good ground. It was really sort of picking up as a sector. So I knew that was the next spot for me. But no, Rocket for a couple of years and then went over to Revolut.
Were you doing anything before Rocket?
Not really. No, I was just doing, I was at uni, right? I was studying. So Rocket was pretty much my fresh face. I had like a little stint doing for a PR agency, but it was barely even 6 months, I think. So I don't even count it.
Okay, fair play. A good experience. How many people were in the Rocket Internet project team?
So for the company we were working on, there was split between London and Berlin, and there was probably the best part of 300 people, I would say, in that company, covering pretty much everything. So Rocket had this culture of, hire fast and break things, right? So they would just build teams, build playbooks, go, and we're very open to the fact of it might fail, and these people might not work out. So it was a pretty intense sort of environment, but hugely valuable, and definitely set me up on the right path for going into somewhere like Revolut, which was Rocket on steroids in terms of the intensity and the culture.
And just for people out there, what does Rocket Internet do, and what was the domain that you specialized in?
Yeah, so they predominantly build basically e-commerce companies across Europe and Asia. So some of the brands they've built, and I might get some of these wrong, I hope not, but you have the likes of Zalando, HelloFresh, you had Helpling. So they've built several, billion-dollar companies. Foodora is another one on the quick e-commerce food delivery market. So they basically, if we're being honest, they look at ideas that are taking off in the US and scaling quite well. They copy them and then blitz scale them across Europe and Asia to try and swallow up the market. So it's a bit of a cheeky business model.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, right? Because all the social media companies in America are doing that. They're copying TikTok, and it's I don't see a big deal. See, in our part of the world, people label Chinese companies copycats, but everyone copies.
Yeah,
it's normal.
No, 100%. It's very rare you get an original business model these days, right? It usually is a copy, and even if you are the first tech company to do it, you're still copying from an incumbent, right, or a corporate. Essentially, you're claiming to do it better and cheaper and faster, etc., etc. So, I think we all have to kind of acknowledge and put arrogance aside and realize that one way or another you will be copying, whether you like it or not, and not just on the idea, but even at a strategy level internally. Playbooks are there for a reason, right? So,
yeah, we know that, Jake, don't we? We know a lot of copying.
We do. And you straight out of university. Was that just undergraduate and then straight into London?
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Oh, that's,
So it was,
and were you studying in Scotland or England?
No, I studied in Scotland, in Aberdeen. I didn't fancy paying tuition fees, so I stayed tight.
Scotland's free. We're too tight, you know.
Should have gone to Scotland.
No, you'd have to pay.
You wouldn't get it.
I'd have to pay.
Yeah,
I see what it is.
You have Scottish grandmother, right, Jake? You can claim.
I don't actually.
Scottish.
They've got one.
Jake jokes, Chad, that he actually wants to move to the Highlands. He wants to move to a cabin in the Highlands.
Yeah, in the Highlands.
Well, you joke, mate, but last summer I did a Highland tour, did Skye and all the rest of it. And, you know, I think there's so many people in London I've started to really hate people, just generally, all people. And then when I went to the Highlands and you saw no people, it was just therapeutic. I came back a changed man. Oh, yeah,
I completely agree with you, Chad. And when we say I joke, I'm also deadly serious. If I could have a strong internet connection in the cabin in the woods,
you don't
and
get that.
You know, be in the right time zone, trust me, bro, I'd be your next door neighbor. We can go up there together.
You've got no excuse now because you got Starlink, the Elon Musk's Wi-Fi, right? That can go anywhere.
Yeah, I know, but he can't modify the time zone
already.
You boys didn't grow up with like barely 2G like telephone like signal, aka nothing. Well, not as bad as me.
No.
So what employee were you at Revolut, Chad? Like number? You must have been like single digit, were you? Like first 100?
No, I was in the double digit, but early double digits. I always get this wrong, but I think it was somewhere around like 17.
Wow.
Within that region. So sometimes I think there were maybe some folks in Russia I wasn't aware of at that time. So it might be just slightly higher than that. But yeah, very, very early doors. I mean, it was, you know, based in level 39, which is the incubator in Canary Wharf, up in Canada Square. And, you know, I remember when the first interview I went in, it was the best part of like 11, 12 people in the office. And then the rest were based in Russia.
So the guy, Storonsky, he interviewed you? Like,
Yeah. Nick and Vlad both interviewed me. And it was a surreal experience. I always laugh about it because I remember he just basically walked in and was like, you do marketing? I was like, yep. He's like, you don't need budget? Nope. Okay. It was very just to the point because I think Nick wasn't really a believer in marketing. He's one of those like classic sort of technical product founders, right? Who thinks that the product will do everything, right? You don't need marketing. And, you know, in some situations, I guess that can be true depending on who the founder is. But so I definitely got an impression of like, I'm definitely only here because an investor has told him he needs to hire a marketing person. But I think he just didn't have confidence. I think he'd maybe experienced some marketing folks before and it sort of put a negative sort of light in his mind. But no, it was the quickest interview process of my life in the extent that I met Nick and Vlad, and then I met 3 or 4 of the other founding team. So Ed Cooper, I think Lewis Tuff, and maybe 1 or 2 more. And then by the time I got down to Canada Place and entering Canary Wharf Station, the HR lady at the time just straight away rang me up and was like, yeah, can you start Monday? So it was pretty surreal. Yeah.
Did they have any money? How much money did they have? Like a lot, or were you kind of like scrappy?
No, at that point, I mean, back then it was okay. I mean, we live in a world now where a Series A is 50, 60, 70 million, right? And then, you know, go back 6, 7 years ago, a big Series A was the best part of 5, 6 million. So it's mental, right? And that's now a pre-seed. So I think they'd raised probably in the region of like 5 mil by the time I joined, which was their first cash injection from, I believe, Boulderton. So yeah, there was a little bit of cash in the bank, but not much.
And what was the vision at that time? Like, what was the kind of the aim for them?
So it was an interesting one, right? Because the aim that sort of Nick would always say was, you know, to be like the Amazon of banking. That's the one I remember, you know, the Amazon of banking. And there was sort of 2 issues with that for me. One is I'm just sick to death of people saying they're the something of something, right? They're the Uber of this, or it's just a sort of lazy, cheap sort of way of sort of branding yourself. And I think the other one is that means nothing. You go up to someone and say, I'm the Amazon of banking. I would have no idea what they mean by that. So that was twofold. But I got the goal was he wanted to build basically this hyper tech bank, right, that you've never seen before. And that's a great vision. But the problem is that's not what they were then, right? It was a very simplistic product where you could swap currencies and spend abroad using a card. So to not over sort of sexy it was a travel card, right? And I had to be serious about that, because when I was going in and working on the marketing strategy and the comms and everything else, that's what I had to go with. And it didn't go well with other people because that's not very sexy. But my view is there's a huge market here, particularly in Europe, in terms of not only the travel numbers, but in terms of the currencies that you have across borders. It's a very simple product that will solve a very big problem, and therefore it needs simple language, does what it says on the back of the tin. But of course, it didn't have the big sexy titles and glam around it. But so it was a hard battle to win that narrative. But when you looked at Monzo, who were saying they were the something of banking, and Starling saying it, and N26 saying it, the worst thing I could have done as a marketer is say, yeah, let's gel in with that. Even though we were, probably 6 to 8 months behind them in terms of product development, there was no features or products that were actually banking. So that was the big call initially, was just to really focus on that travel segment, hit that critical mass, and then we'd be in a position to start building a bank on top of that.
Yeah, wow. It's kind of funny how these companies all start around the same time, right? It's like they realized that the banks were shit. Like, it was painful. It still is painful using your bank online.
Yeah,
there was like a moment everyone's like, okay, this is bad. We got to do something.
So yeah, exactly. Mondo crowd, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's right. They changed.
Yeah, they did. I was in Mondo, working, I think only about 100 meters probably from the Monzo office. In fact, at one time, I think I lost my card, and they said, "Oh, just come to the office and get another card," And I was like, "Okay, yeah." So I did. So actually, I've been in the enemy territory, behind enemy lines. But no, I was going to ask. So I think this is. I think your knowledge and your insight and your perspective, particularly on the positioning of Revolut, is really good. Incredible that you nailed that out of university. I'm not taking away from any mentors or help, but I'd just love to know how that process started. Like, where did you start? What was square one?
In terms of my career, or just Revolut?
In terms of how we get through to Revolut, like, I think you've done an excellent job at saying this is how you positioned it, but how did you build that position? Like, what was the starting block to get to the end goal?
Yeah, so I guess you're right? So that positioning was nailed, right? We know what segment we're in. We know who our target audience is, which is predominantly young folks. Now we have to think of, we have no budget. How do we go to those people? Because that's always the key thing with marketing that we forget, right? Is your job is to take the message and go to where the consumer is. And a lot of lazy marketers think, oh, that's on the London tube. No, it's fucking not, right? And it's not on this sort of bullshit conventional marketing tactics you see. So there's a few things we did to sort of really get those early adopters in the door. The first one was we started to really pitch hard with airlines. Because the reason being was we knew that all pilots and all air hosts would want a Revolut card. So we did the most growth hacky things, from going on LinkedIn and individually messaging people who had pilot and an air host in their CVs, on their profiles. Sorry, we tried to strike partnerships to give free cards to airlines, particularly some of the smaller ones as well. Because you have to remember, Revolut was a European-wide company from day one, because we had the European license that would allow that. So we worked with the likes of Money Saving Expert, in which we did some data analysis and quickly realized that a lot of our target audience goes straight there when they're looking for the best cards or the best this to use. So we set up some commercial affiliates with them. So really low for us. It was kind of a small budget, to be fair, at that point, where they'd probably get like £2 for every user we got or something. And it wasn't crazy numbers, but it was very much that growth hacky mindset on the very, very early days of how do we get that first 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 users to bring them on board. More importantly, they're what we would have classified as sticky users, right? Because we also know as marketers, acquisition is often not the hard part. Engagement is. right? Getting them in the funnel is often quite easy. Getting them to stay and stick around and use the product to make, that would make them a viable user, that's the challenging aspect. So for us, we knew that there wouldn't be much work needed there, because realistically, they're traveling every single day for their employment. They're going to multiple different countries and multiple different currencies, and that virality would spread, because one thing we knew is that community who work in aviation are very close knit. And they would start to say, oh, by the way, you've got to get this card. And when they all meet up and go for dinner and one whaps their card out and they say, oh, what card's that? That sort of virality was fairly obvious for us. So that was a really good case of really knowing your positioning, really knowing who your target audience is, and starting with one demographic that you think would be the stickiest at that point in time. And it was.
Nice. And then obviously there was a scale. I'm curious, if it's not out of home tube advertisements, what's your go-to-market strategy for the big awareness campaigns?
So for us, it wasn't about that. It wasn't about, we didn't care about being on billboards or being out there and looking glitz and glam, because 9 times out of 10, it actually brings little value, right? And ROI. And you can put the whole brand awareness metric on it and try and find some bullshit to justify, but it means nothing realistically. What we were more focused on was being as customer driven as we possibly could, right? One thing I used to always say to the team is, we want to be in a position where our users do the marketing for us. And what we wanted to do by that was build a community marketing strategy that would make our users so heavily involved in the business itself that they would then not only be, essentially feel obligated to have to go and tell all their friends and family. And we did this in a number of ways. So we started to put our public roadmap out there. So we had we're building a bank. There's so many different features and products you can build. And we were sort of making the decisions ourselves internally as to what people wanted. So, we stuck our roadmap on a Trello board, sent it out to users, and they could literally up and down vote what we should build in the next 3, 6, 9 months. So we would populate it, they would prioritize. That got users thinking, holy shit, these guys are saying, oh, we're a community and we're building this together. That's an easy thing to say, but now they got their first taste of how we actually were trying to do that realistically. Other things we did was, my view was, well, look, it's not good enough them just having a say, being able to name features and tell us what we should build. They should have some skin in the game. So we did 2 of the biggest crowdfunding campaigns in history, still to this day. We did the first one, which, if memory serves, was for 2 million, I think it was, through Crowdcube. And the logic there was, we were allowing our power users, so the ones who've actually ordered a card, activated it, and using it, to invest in the business as well. So suddenly they're now sat there saying, okay, I'm getting a say in what the company builds. I'm getting to help name products. I now actually have some shares and ownership in the company. Then we started hosting local events. So we started to see that we had clear segments of like London, Berlin, Paris, like hubs of where these users were. So we started to host local community events. We sent some of our best speakers. We'd go through a product roadmap, very chilled environment, sort of beer, music, pizza, just to show that we weren't just a virtual community, but we could be a physical one as well. So yeah, I think that we did so many more initiatives like that, of just bringing the users close to the brand as possible, both financially as well as physically. And then we knew the point in time would come where we would flick on the referral machine, right? And we didn't want to have users refer while needing money. The logic was, if they really love us, let's put it to the test. Let's really nail the tone of voice and the copy in terms of how we speak to the users. Let's be very open, very transparent with them. And what we started to do initially with the first referral campaign, there was no financial incentive. So there wasn't, you get a tenner, I get a tenner. What we did is, I started to look at the data, and the view was, there's no point in us just sending out random, hey, invite a friend at random times and days. There's no science behind that. So the logic was, what would we define as the aha moments within the app, right? So that's the moments we think they'll experience where they'll think, shit, I really see the value in this product. And what that usually came from was, when someone went overseas and then returned, we'd be able to send them a push with a summary of how much we saved them in fees. That's the one that always did it. And that was the perfect time, not only to really, in a nice creative way, show them what we just saved them as a free product, but then to say, and you must know a friend or family member who'd benefit from this too. CTA, invite a friend. I don't remember the numbers off my head because it was so many years ago now, but it was insane. I think it was the best part of over 100K referrals made that weekend alone from that campaign going out, which was also a fucking nightmare because we crashed. Customer support were absolutely overwhelmed, so it wasn't all positive. But yeah, that it just showed me that the science behind trying to be a genuine community-driven marketing strategy worked in that sense, but also not taking it for granted and still being sure to show the value on a continuous basis that you're bringing the user beyond those community actives, but actually financially.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of like the OnePlus strategy. Like, not when I arrived, but before I arrived, they did kind of similar community, events, that kind of thing. But I think the thing is like that's obviously really great in the early phase, like when you're growing and you want to acquire users and like grow. But then there obviously comes a stage when you have to like not abandon it, but like you have to kind of move on from that, right? And I think that was my next question. Like, obviously after that time, you guys it became like a really well-known brand. Between your Revolut and Monzo, there was like a big kind of rivalry. And so then how do you then think about the next phase? Like, okay, we've done all these kind of growth hacks. How do we scale our kind of operations?
Yeah, so it's like you say, right? There comes a point where there's two issues with it. One is you exhaust it, right? You exhaust that free, invite your friends, and eventually everyone's invited as many friends and family as they can, and you can't just keep, begging it and begging it. Equally, it's hard to justify that when in the media you're then raising hundreds of millions in venture capital, and there might be that you're going to start giving a little something back. So we knew that.
Just to hold you in that point, like some of the people we talk to, they're really big companies and they do like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, and it looks so lame, like how the hell can you be venture backed and massive and do Kickstarter?
Exactly.
It's really stupid, right?
So on one hand, we exhausted it. The numbers just started to go down and down and down on the free referral mechanism. On the second hand, to your point, it started to look desperate and cheap, which didn't sit tight with us. And then we knew there would have to now going forward be an incentive for people to want to do it. So that's where we started to bring in some of the benefits of, you give X, get Y, right? So you would get something for inviting a friend, and so would they. But it was about getting the unit economics right, because, it's very easy just to slap a tenner or 20 quid on the table and say, yeah, you both get a tenner, you both get 20 quid. One of the questions I always ask startups that I advise today is, where's that number coming from? Right? How have you come to that number? And then you have to remember, as a European business where we had lots of customers in Eastern Europe and Central Europe and Southern, the currencies are different and the GDPs are lower in those countries as well. So while offering £20 in the UK, Germany and France is seen as normal and not that incentivizing, that is very, very high for users, say, in Romania or Poland. So I had to also sit there and be like, well, actually, we shouldn't be paying these people in Poland the equivalent of £20 GDP, because that's insane. That's far too high. We should be bringing that down to what the relevant GDP is and breaking it from there. So there's also a bit of I think it's something we don't often talk about enough as marketers, is the nitty gritty on the numbers and understanding the economics behind it. But that was a good way for us to really scale a paid referral scheme, but ensuring that there's good logic behind what we're doing. The other mistakes that a lot of companies were making back then as well is there was no engagement attributed to the reward. So it would very much be invite a friend, and if they download the app and sign up, they get 20 quid. That doesn't make sense to me, because that person has not brought you any value yet, and you maybe can't even define them as an actual customer. So we then also brought in these additional layers, which is invite a friend, but your friend's going to have to order a card and make their first payment, and then you will get the reward. Because at that point, the buyback for us would be higher, right? We're not just burning cash and throwing 20 quid at null users. And also the fraud rates would be lower as well, because there's always people who will fraud and game a referral scheme to make money, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, where we experienced it most. So also adding in those layers was a way to ensure that we would keep fraud rates low as well.
Yeah.
So there was a whole science behind the referrals.
Yeah, and so yeah, so like you guys are getting big, and then like so Jake's last company, he was at Alibaba, and we which is a massive company, right? And obviously we worked at Oppo, a smartphone company, which again was 40,000 people. The reason we quit these companies is because we don't like working for big companies. I'm guessing that was the same with you. Like it kind of got really big, and then you're like, holy shit, I'm in a big machine here. I don't like this.
100%. And it was the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. I've made a lot of hard decisions in my life. But that hands down, Revolut was not a job for me, right? I was very lucky to join very early, to be in the senior leadership team for the best part, most of my time there, to have a lot of equity in the company as well. So part of it felt like my company. I'd been there so early, and Nikolai was always very good in pointing out that this is our company. We've all built this together. We've been here from the early days, and so to walk away from that when everyone knows you as Chad of Revolut, and everyone was hard.
I know you as Chad as Revolut. Like I always knew you.
But I had to be honest with myself, which is, I wouldn't just say I'm early stage. I'm perfectly comfortable in a scale-up environment as well. But the inevitability, and I knew this would come, I'm not dumb, and anyone who claims they didn't see it coming, needs to give their head a shake, right? Because it's a financial company. And when you're a financial company and you're very early stage, the regulators don't really care so much about you, right? They're not really pawning in on you. But when you suddenly start getting millions of users, you're in the media every single week, you're holding much larger volumes of user funds, that's when they start really coming down on you, and rightfully so. Especially when you also want to start getting different licenses for doing different things. So you could then see that started to happen, and it had to happen for the next stage of Revolut's journey. But then with that came the bureaucracy, the red tape, and the grey-haired bankers coming in and now sitting on the boards and the leadership team. And I think for me, I wasn't upset because, again, I've got a lot of skin in this company, and I know that's what they need to get to that next stage and get the licenses they need and keep regulators happy. But for me, it was also heartbreaking because everything I built and the culture that was just slowly fading away, and all the people who I'd done it with were slowly dropping off one by one. And I can probably less than 10 of the originals, and I give people a bit of slack. I say even people that joined maybe 1 year in who are still quite early, there's less than 10. And if people who were there from the very beginning, there's less than 4. So for me, it was kind of, I'm a very creative person. I do want to have, but my day-to-day was just risk, was people management, was bureaucracy of every sort of big thing I wanted to do, having to go through 5 committees in order to get approved. And that buzz I used to have of every morning waking up was just deteriorating as the weeks went by. So for me, it wasn't right to stay in that position and sort of be there. They need someone to come in and sort of take that baton away and progress it forward. And I did it. And the worst part as well is I left right during the first lockdown. So there was no party, there was no seeing everyone. It just felt really cold and empty because I still went into the office because I lived right next to it. But yeah, I'll never forget also my last day. Some of the originals came in, to have some beers together, but it was just quite a depressing feel because the office was dead and nothing was going on. But yeah, that's a long way of saying yeah, basically.
Yeah, it's hard to say goodbye. It's like when Jake went to Alibaba, I was sad.
Yeah, to be honest, though, I was just reflecting, not to get into another conversation we've already had on this podcast, Alex, but I used to work in a startup in London, and not too far away from the Monzo office in Old Street. And I wasn't there from the early days. I think the company had probably been alive for about 4 years when I joined. But I joined at the part where, this company was being sold after about 2 years of being there. And yeah, I don't know, there is watching these things happen and the transformation come in and, the culture shift. Yeah, it can be it can be a bit of a shock, and I think it can take people internally as well as new people that come into the business by surprise, because newcomers don't really understand the culture or how this business has been operating. And that's what also created the growth and scale to where it is now. But the rules of the game change, and I think that also can be like a culture shock for a lot of people, rather than any kind of like financial metrics going up or down, or management change. I think the culture shock issue is something that's often overlooked as like a company, when it scales and it grows and new people come into the business, the whole identity kind of changes. So I hear what you're saying there.
And I think it's the other part to it that's quite sad as well, because I want to be careful what I say, because I know I won't. Everyone knows me. I'm very loyal to Revolut. I wouldn't shit on them, but it's also just sad to see that the strategy that you implemented from day one that could also work at scale to a fair extent just eliminates. And so many people come up to me now and are just like, man, what is Revolut's marketing these days? It's just spamming me every day, begging me to invite a friend and offering me £100. I can't remember the last time an email spoke to me like a human, but it's now more robotic and corporate, or, they see no aspect of community in the company anymore. And, some people will argue with me, and maybe they're right, and say, oh no, it has to go at scale. And I don't believe anything has to go at scale. I think there's always a balance to be found. It's a bit like the point you're making, where you see a senior leadership team get cleaned out and a new one come in. I don't believe that's always necessary. I think there will always be an opportunity where, yes, there'll be a few roles where you will absolutely need to clean out, because you need a CFO who's done it for a company of that size or whatever. But there's a lot of roles where that doesn't need to happen. And when they do clean out, both in terms of the strategy and the people who kind of made the company what it is, it just becomes such a soulless brand. And I hope they can figure that out. But knowing what I know and still knowing people there, marketing is just purely about profit at all cost.
It is also because there's like a knowledge transfer. You clean the team out, and that team again that built this company, that knowledge goes, and then the corporate knowledge comes in, replaces it, and again, it's a culture shock. It's a culture shock. I've been through it.
I literally posted something just like this on LinkedIn, Alex. I don't know if you saw it, but I basically, Jake, what you said almost word for word. And I just remember it got quite a bit of traction, but I remember looking at who's viewed your profile, and it was a bunch of those people who clearly were not aligned with that statement. But
But do you think it's not kind of human nature as well? Because like, whenever you get like a big, like when you're a small team, like you're all kind of like in it together and you're scrappy. And then when things get big, you don't know people because you don't work closely with them. And then I think humans are like sheep, right? We just adopt this, we need to have a corporate line. We need to have a corporate position. And everyone just sort of tacks to that corporate mode. And then before you know it, like, oh, fuck, we're just corporate, I think it happens to every company, right? And there's very few companies that don't do this, like big companies. Very few.
Yeah, and you question where, is it a generational thing, and will it die out? And I used to believe that. I used to think, oh no, this is just a generational thing, give it 20 years. And I think, and now I'm seeing people who I really know and respect, and I know how great they are, and they've completely become those people. And I'm just sat there thinking, like, God, it's maybe it's not a generational thing. It's obviously something that's so ingrained in corporate culture that is passed on. But it's like I said, I think there's always balance, right? People always say in fintech, you need the balance of fin and tech, right? So you need the financial people who are going to be more corporate and are going to be more red tape, but they will bring the knowledge and expertise that you do lack. Whereas you need the tech people who are the innovators, who are going to move fast, who are going to ship. But the problem is, I think what summarizes this point perfectly is too many companies do not find that balance. They go straight for the corporate majority. And then it's time and time again, you just see it not be I'm yet to see an example of it be a very positive thing for a company.
The other people we can blame here are agencies, marketing agencies, because me and Jake saw this. Like when you have people that work in the company from an early stage, they're company people. They know the products, they know the company. And then when you bring people from like agencies, big name agencies, they just bring their, and we're talking about a specific person here that worked for Ogilvy, but they actually walked around the office with an Ogilvy lanyard. So they worked for our company, but she wore a Ogilvy lanyard on her neck, which to me was just like, what the hell is that all about? Like, why would you do that? And every time it was the Ogilvy playbook. Oh, we did this at Ogilvy. We did that at Ogilvy.
Yeah, they're just like management consultants. It's just playbooks, right? There's never like a really fresh approach to a company where they go in, they really want to learn, understand, build. It's very much like we think we've got a formula here that works everywhere. And you see that everywhere. You see it in branding now. Like, look at all the branding identities in tech. They're all the fucking same. Put all their logos down and bar some color changes in a different font. It's just soulless and dead. And I think you make a good point. I think a large part of it does come down to branding and marketing agencies, and often the ones who make a song and dance about how innovative and creative they are. But it is what it is.
I have a question. End this segment on a light note. It can be B2B, B2C, Go Cardless, Monzo. What's your top picks for fintech out there?
In what sense?
In sense of stuff that you might use, stuff that you think is good, stuff that's up and coming, brands that you respect.
Okay,
like you're the fintech expert here, so.
So I would say, other than Revolut, Monzo did a very, very good job of community as well. And I think they particularly nailed, where Revolut didn't, they particularly nailed their customer service. We all know that 90% of a great brand is the customer experience, right? And customer service is usually up there as number one. You can have the prettiest, most creative brand in the world, but if people have a shitty experience and getting through to your support and resolving their problems, that all goes out the window. So I would say they invested in the UK, which is a much more expensive option of, we went to Poland, for example, and the language barrier was a massive difference. The empathy was a massive difference. They had so many processes in place for like vulnerable customers. And I think they pretty much wrote the playbook, in fintech for that. So, I would definitely, I'd say that customer care was without question there. And I didn't, one of my faults was not being closer to customer support back in the day, thinking it's a totally different function. They'll sort their own shit out. That was an error, and I should have been very close to them from day one. In terms of influencer marketing, which I'm not a fan of, by the way. I think most of them are twats, and I wouldn't use them for my brand. But the one company that absolutely nailed influencer marketing was Cash App in the US. And I'm not, every pop star, you have literally most R&B stars mentioning Cash App in their lyrics or showing it on their videos. They had giveaways where Justin Bieber was giving away $2 million. Phenomenal. I mean, if you have that kind of capital, of course.
Right,
but I think they truly did nail it, even at that scale. You've still got to give credit.
I looked at Square, Block. They're called Block now. I looked at their SEC filing recently, and Cash App is their biggest business now in terms of revenue.
100%. It's and they're building a Revolut, right? They're trying to be a super app, right? Crypto, banking, payments, all smudged into one app. But that was also a failure of us, because Revolut should have dominated the US. And I still to this day think I had the correct strategy, but it got ignored. And then you look at Revolut today in the US, it's non-existent, right? No one uses it over there.
What was the, maybe you can't share a bit, what was the main issue with the US?
So it comes kind of back down to that unsexy idea. Now, believe it or not, I am a creative marketer at heart, right? But I'm realistic enough to know you can't polish a turd always, right? And you have to work with what you have. And when Revolut was going to the US, it was very much the ops team were like, no, we're going to copy and paste what we're doing in Europe. And that made no sense to me. Completely different continent, different culture. You can't just assume what works here works there. Secondly, most Americans don't even have a fucking passport. So they're definitely not traveling. And if they are, it's interstate. So that, for me, just as a USP product, would never have worked. But what I did realize is there's a huge immigrant population of Latinos, Europeans, Southeast Asians, you name it, who cannot for the life of them open a bank account in the US. I don't know if I've got so many friends who have tried it. It takes them, if they don't have their social security number yet, it takes them the best part of like 12 weeks. And 9 times out of 10, they still get refused. Because a lot of those banks look at them as like, you'll never be profitable for us. So they don't open the accounts, which you could argue is fair enough. It's a bank is it is a private business. So what I said was there's a huge market opportunity to be the bank for immigrants in the US. And you have to word it that way. We have to build a great advisory board around us of like leaders from migrant communities all over the US. We have to make it accessible. We have to ensure that it's localized for all the languages within those areas so we can really communicate with them. Key. We need to ensure that the products that we're building are going to be based around them, not only living in the US, but also the fact that they'll be sending money home very frequently to South America and beyond. So our remittance side really comes into play for that community, especially. And there's a whole lot we could do around tech for good and being very community driven in those local communities as well. So it wouldn't be a case of, here's our product roadmap to a Latino community in LA, right? It'd be more like, what can we do to be on the ground in the community, investing, really being a part of it. So I had this incredible strategy, and I'm convinced, and I don't mean this in an ego way, because I've been very wrong about many things, but I'm still convinced to this day that was the right approach to take in the US. But yeah, we'll see. We'll never know.
And I think it's the fastest growing demographic, I think, as well, right? Like the Hispanic and the Asian. Yeah.
Exactly.
I will say, if it's any consolation, being a Monzo premium holder over here, their customer service is nowhere near as good as it used to be. I've worked for a couple of different brands with customer service issues, and I can tell you that, in a sense, like the end of the consumer journey, that customer service part is basically, that's where you're going to build most of your negative sentiment on social media if you're not responding to people in the appropriate manner. For example, you don't reply on your social media channels, you only reply inside the app. I think, as a brand of the 21st century, the social media place is the community. It is the community. The community live there. So it's all these not working with the customer service team is like not finalizing the last 100 meters of the race. That's how I feel about it. Is how do we get across the line and go back around the running track and increase that loyalty loop within the consumer journey.
Agreed.
So yeah.
There
we go.
You mentioned, Chad, so in lockdown you left, and then like a lot's happened in crypto in the last few years. I mean, we could spend like all night talking about crypto since 2018 or whatever, but why did you want to get, obviously you got into crypto because it was kind of new and exciting, right? Even though it wasn't new, but in terms of like the broad appeal, 2018 was like when it really took off, I think, in the mainstream.
Yeah, I think my interest first peaked in it at Revolut, because bear in mind, Revolut has probably one of the best user experiences for buying and selling tokens in the world. It is super simplistic. It's almost instant. So I think it sparked off then, but that for me was very simplistic crypto. It was just buying and selling tokens, right? There was nothing much more to it than that. And then I started to take a little bit more of a interest in DeFi. And the reason being is I'm not one of those crypto, I don't bleed crypto, right? You won't see.
You're not Roger Ver, basically.
No. There's so many fucking idiots in the space, right? And my whole personality isn't going to be .eth in my name and NFT pictures on all my profiles. It's, fully grown men act like it. But for me, it's more about the actual technology, that more so than, backing a coin and trying to make a quick buck. And me personally, I've always been old school conservative, and I don't mean party, right? I mean, I believe in small government. I believe in low taxes. I believe in more personal freedoms for people.
Jake, me and Chad agree all the time on Twitter. Like our views are our conservative Scottish views are always aligned.
Yeah,
we always you please join in.
And when I was looking more and more at the corporate world, where people were being locked out of their accounts because they said the wrong thing online. And the fact that banks and other institutions can just freeze your assets because you don't conform to a certain way of thinking, or that this whole thing. And then you look at how the banks are actually in the pockets of certain politics. And I sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? But for me, that didn't sit right. And I also don't want institutions having all of my data, my identity, and me not truly being able to determine what it is they're doing with it. So you look at DeFi, it's basically a big solution to all of that. When it came to crypto, when I was holding my assets, it has to be non-custodial, right? It has to not be in a centralized crypto platform, because we've seen what happens with that, with FTX. Anyone who's holding assets in the likes of Coinbase, Binance is a moron. Like, the only way you can truly own your assets is in a self-custody wallet, right? Where only you have access. So that for me was a big driver, but also knowing that people's identities would be protected as well. And then actually seeing a service that can actually bring financial opportunities to developing parts of the world. You hear it so many times in fintech of like, oh, we want to do tech for good. I'm just going to close this blind. We're going to do tech for good, and we're going to help the bankless. None of them fucking did, right? Because it's so hard to navigate that with regulation, bureaucracy, corruption, whereas DeFi is global, right? So what that means is people who are in a country where the government is corrupt and they have inflation above 30% and their life is totally fucked, DeFi can solve that, because now, boom, they have a non-custodial wallet where the government cannot get access to their funds. They can put their money into stable coins if their currency is too highly inflated. And there's a lot of genuine things. And I see it every day when I look at the data of Argent, and I can see the massive rise of user base we're getting in these countries where people are trying to escape that kind of thing. So again, a very long way of me saying that it just aligned a lot with my values. And it's not because you're this kid trying to make a quick buck in crypto, or someone who is, a whack job conspiracy theorist, just keeping everything there. So
you've come to the right place, though. I just wanted to say then, what's your opinion then on the, like, let's say I live in El Salvador and I'm holding my USDC in Coinbase. So what happens then, though? Is it still faith based?
Well, first is I don't give financial advice. I need to get that on the record. Look, it depends on your situation, but for me, like I said, if you're holding your money in a centralized institution, you're not really owning your assets, right? And FTX was a prime example of that, where you think it's big and successful and safe, and then boom, it's not. And a lot of the time, these companies are not open source either. Like, if you look at Argent and other brands in the DeFi space, our code is open source. So you can see exactly what we build, how we build it, what the logic is behind what we do. And for a lot of people in crypto, that's a big deal. That means you're not just having blind faith in a company that's got all these dodgy setups, as you've seen with many others as well. So for me, it applies to everyone regardless of their situation. I think if it's non-custodial, you own your assets as well as your identity. And from a security perspective as well, and on top of that, usually if you're putting it in stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar, that's a far less riskier situation than holding it in pesos or something in Argentina or wherever, where it's highly volatile. They
still crash though. I think that's the point I was making. There still is an element of faith and risk involved in being and investing in blockchain technologies. It may not necessarily, as well, the institutions that we wear tinfoil hats because of, they are inside that space as well. And they do move liquidity around, and it does affect users. It affects the people that are staying outside of the regulated space.
Yeah, let's be clear. Nothing is safe, right? No fiat currency, no cryptocurrency. There's always going to be an element of risk. But my view is, in that particular situation, I'd feel far less at risk with a non-custodial wallet that no one can access bar me, pegged to a relatively stable coin, than holding it in a bank in El Salvador and allowing the local peso to dictate, my net worth. So it's definitely, there's no perfect solution. But what you can clearly see is people are opting for that far more. And then historically as well, again, you're right, a lot of this is crashed, but historically you were getting far higher interest rates by staking in DeFi than you were putting it in a savings account with a bank, right? And people were leveraging that 7-8% yields for a long time. But again, some of them fail, or, and even some of the more safer coins as well. You've seen Ethereum, right, in terms of its appreciation. And so, yeah, there is no perfect solution, and there's an element risk with all of it, or a faith-based point as you make. But really, people are opting for that as a safer option for them.
What was the attraction of Argent, the team and the company?
Do you know, it's an interesting one, because when I left Revolut, I was going to do my own thing, dead set on it, and I still will. I'm very open and honest about that. My plan is to, Argent's my last gig, and then I'm going to do my own thing with some ex-Revolut people. But so yeah, I had no intentions, but I just met the founders, and I had a very similar vibe to them, like I did with Nick and Vlad back in the day, where, between Itamar, Julian, and Gerald, they're hyper intelligent, all three of them, incredibly intelligent. They all have really niche skill sets that separates them quite nicely as well. Gerald's a conventional CTO, Julian is the blockchain engineer and math genius, and then you have Itamar, who's the business product driven guy as well. So I think they worked really hard over the period of like 4 or 5 months to kind of get to know me and incentivize me to join. And I think what Argent is essentially trying to build is the Revolut of DeFi, right? Which is, you will have this one app where you have the best protocols and the best applications in DeFi all merged into one, with beautiful UI and UX, low fees, and high security. And if you speak to anyone in DeFi who knows it and uses it frequently, you'll know that just the idea of that is like music to their ears, because DeFi is so broken, where you have to somehow discover all these different products that live everywhere, and then they all come with very different and varying fee structures and product offerings, and there's often a, can I really trust this? So what we're trying to build is that trusted place where we vet them, we look at their contracts, we make sure they've had audits, we'll make sure that they're open source as well, and that it'll be that one-stop DeFi shop where you can get the best of it in one. So that vision in itself, I could definitely see the massive gap that is in the market for a product like that.
Is it going to be centralized?
No, we're decentralized.
Completely. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to.
That's why I was shitting on centralized.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard in your career, right? When you worked in big companies and you've worked in successful product launches, and it's hard then to jump in again. So like, I admire you for kind of jumping back in again. Me and Jake jump out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny.
You mentioned. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say I was a bit offended at the time, but I kind of get it now. But I remember Itamar, when I was going to join Argent, he was like, are you sure you can do it again? I was like, what the fuck do you mean? I'm sure I can do it again. But I kind of get what he was meaning now, because you even sometimes I don't even realize it, but you're massively burned out, and trying to really go back to the days of growth hacking and being so hands-on. I'll always be hands-on, but obviously much smaller team, smaller resource. So it was a fair point. But yeah, I felt I'm only in my early 30s. I've still got some life in me yet. So
yeah, no, it's fair. And you did mention that you were thinking of, like, in the future you'd like to do something yourself. Take it from being Jake, it's hard. It's bloody hard.
It is. It's a journey.
It is. I'm just very lucky that the people who I want to do it with are just early Revolut people who have great skill sets. So arrogantly, if anyone can do it, I think we can. But we might fall flat on our face. Who knows? But yeah, it's.
I think doing new things is the best way to learn stuff fast. Like, we've learned so much. I couldn't even do a fucking podcast like a few months ago, and I actually do this, edit this, and you just learn so much stuff, when you're trying stuff. I think in corporate you do get kind of you just kind of get ring fence sometimes, and you don't learn.
I mean, that is the best part of doing a startup, right? Or even if you're not doing it yourself, if you're in the leadership team, there's nothing worse than being pigeonholed, right? I mean, I openly say today I sometimes get bored shitless of just doing marketing, because I think once you've done it so many times, it kind of just becomes a bit repetitive and you're doing the same thing again. And what I like now that I always negotiate in is I also go into a company and I want to be working on more operational aspects of the company as well, just to really mix it up, learn new skill sets. So I think that's a big piece of advice I'd give people as well, is if you are going into a startup and you're going in at a fairly senior level, just always try and negotiate that, you're not going to be pigeonholed and you can get involved in the wider decision making in the business as well. You won't regret.
Making decisions is key. Like the ability just to make decisions is just, it just gives you a life, it gives you, like me and Jake, we take board meetings in a particular bar in Bangkok, called Octave. Like that is our place for board meetings. Like it's not conventional, but it's like we do it because we like to do it.
Yeah. Fair play.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Have you been over here, Asia, much or?
Do you know, I've been to a few places. I've been to Hong Kong once, which was for Hong Kong FinTech Week, and I was honored to discover the harbours called Aberdeen. I've been to Singapore twice, and that's Australia. I guess if you put Australia in there, it's not too far away from Singapore. But yeah, other than that, no, haven't been to China, haven't been to Japan, so I've still got lots to do. But the problem is I'm very vanilla with my food. So I'm the Scottish guy that give me queuing up.
I just had my dad in Bangkok, and me, Jake, and my dad had a meal together, and it's a struggle. Like if you don't like Asian food, it's not easy.
Nah, it's not for me. I guess it depends. Vietnamese food I can get down with, but it's a hit or miss.
I know. Yeah, we've been here for a while, Jake, haven't we?
Yeah, I'm in Vietnam in 2 days. Singapore in 2 weeks. Yeah, but I don't know. I like Asia. I think you should check it out, mate. I think you should come over here. Come to Bangkok. Give me a phone call. I'll show you the sites, and I think that you'll be. The crypto scene is absolutely happening in Bangkok. By the way, I am not sure you're aware of that, because a lot of people. I don't want to say too much here. I don't want to lose my visa, but a lot of people come to Thailand because the laws, if you look like somebody that could potentially be beneficial to Thailand, it's a little bit loose with the visas. So a lot of crypto money comes through Thailand, a lot of projects, and especially since certain situations started happening in Ukraine, there's a lot of Russians here. And that capital is going into a lot of blockchain technology.
Yeah.
So come check it out.
It is on my list.
Chinese. Yeah, and Chinese money going into crypto, like it's massive. Like, there's so much Chinese speculation in crypto. It's insane. So Hong Kong's coming back, I think, in crypto. But,
the problem is are people going to trust? Hong Kong is obviously now part of China. And the problem is people who are in DeFi, for example, specifically, they're in it because they don't trust institutions and governments. And then you have territories like Russia and China, which are the complete anti of what we stand for, plowing money into crypto and DeFi companies. So, I personally wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot barge pole, but each to their own.
But this is Asian money, right? Asian money going in within Asia. So I guess, Singapore.
It can be Asian money, but who are the founders, right? So if you're telling me lots of Russian tech people are coming here and starting companies, it's I don't know. It's just all I'd say is I think you put a lot of due diligence into that and ensuring what the setup is there.
Yeah. But we got Singapore is pretty cool.
Yeah, man. Yeah. One of my favorites.
I think we're going there soon, Jake. Right? 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks in Singapore.
Nice.
Cool, man. I don't want to take too much of your time, and it's getting late here, so we'll jump off. But that was a good chat. We'll get you back on in the future.
Yeah, let's get beers next time. I'll make it a bit more leery. I was well behaved today. If you listen to podcasts, it's questionable what I say. I get in trouble all the time.
And I'm going to start tagging Jake in our conservative Twitter stuff so he can get involved.
Nice. And if you send me like a video file, I'll put it on my LinkedIn and all the rest of it. I'll wait till I see the editing, but I'll put it.
Lovely.
All right. Thanks, boys. Cheers.
Thanks.
See ya. Thanks, man.
Will
Bye.
do.
Bye.